Wow. Oh, hey there. My name's Ross, and I'm a bit of a nerd for all things nature. So a while ago, I started a passion project called, Nerdy About Nature. It began as social media videos sharing cool fun facts and tidbits of wisdom about the natural world, and has since evolved into this podcast that you're tuning into here. This project serves as a means to inspire, educate, and engage folks with the outdoor world so that we can all become better stewards of it, and so that we can all work together to create a more inclusive, diverse, equitable, and just future for each and every one of us in this world that we all share. Because nature, it's pretty dang neat, you know? I think we should keep it that way. So come on, let's go get nerdy about nature. Come and take a nature walk with me. We're gonna check out some really cool trees. We're gonna hang around and talk about all those things in nature that we can't live without. Let's go get nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature. Nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature, baby. Nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature. Come on, let's get nerdy about nature. What is up, fellow nerds? Welcome to the Nerdy About Nature podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Charlotte Dawe, who works for the Wilderness Committee in BC, advocating and pushing for policy changes to help protect various ecosystems throughout the province. Now, her and I caught up to debrief on her time spent in Montreal for COP15. The United Nations Conference on Biological Diversity. So the good, the bad, the ugly, and all that comes with these giant international meetings to try to create some sort of global plan for addressing biodiversity loss and maintaining its health into the future. So we talk all about biodiversity in BC and Canada at large, some policy hurdles and shifts taking place. And then towards the end, we kind of divert to another complex topic, that of glyphosate, which you might know commonly as Roundup, and how it's being used in massive quantities all over our public lands in forestry and agriculture, despite some pretty well-known harmful impacts it has on all sorts of life, ours included. So lots to go over and unpack in this episode. It's going to be a great one. But before we get into all of that, I wanted to let you know that there are a couple changes happening to this podcast that I'm pretty stoked about. So I'm almost a year into these things now, and while it's been going well, I'm still figuring things out and tweaking it along the way. You know, it's constant evolution. Change is a good thing. So if you hang around at the end of the podcast, I will chat more about what I'm hoping to do with it, and it would be awesome to get your involvement. But there is one thing I wanted to mention up front here, and that is, as that most of you are probably aware, this podcast and the whole Nerdy About Nature project is an independent passion project that's made possible thanks to all you great, grand, and amazing folks who support this project on Patreon. You know, the nutrients to the nerdiness, the fungi to the facts, if you will, which is awesome. And I'm so dang appreciative of all of you. I couldn't do it without you. Recently, though, I've got enough support through Patreon where I'm now at a bit of a point where I'm able to kind of spread things out and give back and spread that love around so that we can all thrive, kind of like a healthy forest ecosystem, you know? Which means that starting with this episode, I'll be using some of those Patreon funds to make a donation to a nonprofit of my guest's choice, which is pretty dang exciting. And I'm hoping that as this whole project continues to grow, I can keep giving more and more and working to uplift folks doing so many great things around the world. So hang around to the end of this episode to hear who Charlotte is going to give the inaugural donation to, as well as more insight on things happening in this podcast space and how you can be involved. Now, without any more dilly-dallying, let's get into this chat with Charlotte to hear all about her work with the Wilderness Committee, biodiversity in BC, ridiculous old, established, and outdated laws, crazy legal loopholes, policy failures and successes, how glyphosate has become so commonplace, and how it might be contributing to creating a Handmaid's Tale type world, and much, much more. So, here we go.
1, 2.
Microphone check. Yeah, when I first got these, I was like beatboxing into them. Like, oh, this sounds sick.
That's so fun.
It's like right in your ears.
Well, you can do that also on your spare time. You can have a beatbox.
I started kind of throwing some beatboxing stuff into the beginning of these podcast episodes every now and then, but then I was just like, this is just silly.
That's cool.
What am I doing?
No, that's cool.
Is it though?
Yeah.
Is it cool?
Yeah.
White guy beatboxing?
Maybe not. Maybe if you ask like your guests to.
Yeah.
No, I didn't mean it. Starting next.
No, go ahead. So welcome to the Nerdy About Nature podcast, Charlotte. You
Thanks.
are the first person I've interviewed in 2023. I try to do them all outside, so it's cold. Thank you for joining me. Would you like to start off by beatboxing a bit for us?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Nice.
Thanks. I worked on that the whole way up here.
Kind of like a pretty quick tempo. Like,
Yeah, we go fast.
Yeah.
Fast dancing.
It's kind of like, kind of gave me polka vibes.
Okay, good. That's fine.
All right. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for real? Thank you for beatboxing. Appreciate you entertaining that
You're
idea.
welcome. You're very welcome. Yeah, that's a tough question. I got to introduce myself. My name is Charlotte. Yeah, I work for the Wilderness Committee. I'm the Conservation and Policy Campaigner. I work on wildlife, wilderness protection issues, trying to hold governments accountable, keep eyes on industry in the forest, and try to promote some like good change to protect wildlife and wilderness. Yeah.
And how long have you been with Wilderness Committee for?
6 years. Yeah.
It's a decent stint of time.
Yeah. Ever since I moved out here. Yeah.
Are you from BC originally, or?
No. So I grew up in Treaty 6 territory, Edmonton. I grew up next to a pond full of frogs, which was amazing. I had a really good childhood out there. And then I remember like one night, the like I used to fall asleep to the sound of them like frogs croaking in the pond, and one night it just like went away. It was gone. The pond got drained, and I think like that was the beginning of why I'm like even here or like doing this work.
Oh, interesting.
It's like how intense that was. And then so I moved out here 6 years ago. Coast Salish Territories is where I'm at now, in so-called Vancouver. So yeah,
frogs are a good gateway drug to environmental stuff.
Totally.
I was super into amphibians when I was a kid. I don't have any traumatic stories like that though.
You must.
Why? I mean, yeah, maybe. I probably
That's so
do.
sad that I just automatically think that you
No, I mean,
do.
you're right. Like, I mean, thinking back to like where I grew up, like it's all changed so radically.
Yeah.
It's just like fucking just suburban sprawl everywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure there are stories that I'm like not even aware of there. And I think as a kid too, like I was not checked out, but just distracted. And it's only been like as I've been older and been able to like look back on things and reflect it and being like, wow, this like we used to play in that, like that's toxic.
Yeah.
This is like we used to like literally play in it was like a stormwater pond.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, we just thought it was like a chill little pond, but it's like literally everything
highly
draining
toxic.
off.
Yeah. I mean, we used to like that was the same for me where we grew up. We were kind of the first in this like suburban area, and like it bit away the wilderness there, and we were like my family was a part of that bite. So I think when you're so young, you're just like, the frogs are gone, the pond is gone, but you don't know if it's right or if it's wrong, and it like you feel it, but you don't know. I don't know. And then there's just like a loss. There was a huge loss for me from that, but me and my brothers we never gave up trying to play in like toxic things. Like there was a mud pit outside of our house that we spent a significant amount of our time in. Like I remember one time I jumped in, there's just this dead duck beside me. I was like,
That's
what
gnarly.
are you doing here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dead from natural causes, hopefully.
Oh my God. Like, I don't know. I didn't do a like report.
An autopsy on it?
Yeah, no, I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, and it's such a double-edged sword too, because like obviously with development, like we all grew up in houses that were developed at one point, like whether or not your house is built new or built like 30, 40, 50 years before you moved in, 100 years. But yeah, it's just tough to see change happening so radically.
You feel powerless.
Yeah. And it makes me feel old.
Yeah. Totally.
Especially recently, like seeing places that I've seen like change drastically in like a 5-year span.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm becoming that crotchety old man in like all those stereotypical movies like, oh, you dang kids. I'm like, oh my God, this is nuts.
You're becoming that.
I'm becoming that. I'm trying to stay positive.
Hey, that's cool. I mean, like if you talk about shifting baselines, and I think like, I don't know how old you are, but I feel like we're maybe of the same generation. Like the 90s is like there was still quite an abundance. I don't know, relatively, I guess, but like the declines we've seen since the 90s in wildlife and wilderness is just like, oh my God, it's just so in your face. And especially when you were kind of, if you did spend a lot of time growing up in the wilderness and stuff, then you can see that like so clearly now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And within that, there's such a disconnect between society and those outdoor spaces. Like when I grew up, like outside of Seattle area in Washington, there was like, there were forests like between all the houses, and between like there was a really amazing forest behind my school, my elementary school, that I have like some of my most vivid memories like playing in those woods. And nowadays, I don't know why, probably for like legal reasons or something, but like kids aren't even allowed to play in those woods anymore. It's all fenced off. If those woods even still exist, it's probably actually been developed at this point. But like just the fact that like you're getting kids, elementary school, I don't know how old is that, like 6, 7, 8 years old?
No idea. I'm so bad at that.
Yeah. However old kids are in elementary school, you're cutting them off from like this recess time, this playtime out in like natural spaces, and confining them to either like, I mean, in Washington or in that district, I don't even think you're allowed to go outside anymore if it's raining, because too many kids just don't have jackets and get hypothermic.
Oh, wow.
So it's like you're either in the gymnasium if it's raining, which is like 280 days a year, or you're playing outside on like a plastic playground.
Wow.
Like, so it's really difficult for people to even build those connections these days.
Yeah. And like, especially if it's then like an organized, like outside time, here we go. Like it's an adventure, but it's like, when we were growing up, that was just like the default. Like I go home, I kind of played Halo a little bit, but whatever, a tiny bit.
Halo
but like,
1.
Yeah. I would go on my brother's accounts and I would team kill everyone, and then they would scream at me. No, but like 99% of my time was just outside. I would walk home from school. I would go directly to the forest. Like, I don't even know what we did, but we spent so many hours just like, I think being bored is one of the best things, because your mind just gets going. And especially when you're outside in the woods and you're bored, you're like, what are we going to do? And then you can do anything. And like, but now there's just like so many options available to kids that can just fill that boredom. And I don't know.
Yeah, you create your own fun out there.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of got you into environmental work stuff.
I mean, that's what I link it to. I try to think back about like why I'm this way, because it's been this way since I can remember. And so I just have this like deep love for animals, and just like I really feel their hurt. And then obviously I learned pretty quickly, if you want to protect animals, you have to protect their habitat. So
what kind of work do you do at Wilderness Committee? You do a lot of policy stuff, a lot of advocacy.
Yeah. So,
you're a campaigner.
I do a lot of stuff. Yeah.
What's that mean?
You don't know what that is?
I mean, like,
I'm just kidding. Whenever I tell someone I'm a campaigner, they're like, okay. So, all right. No, there's multiple ways I go about my work. Some of it is policy, and it's sort of like looking at the laws and policies we have and doing our best to use those to protect wilderness and wildlife. Not so shockingly, we don't have a lot of things we can use to protect even endangered species, for instance. Like in BC, it's entirely legal to bulldoze the habitat home to breeding caribou, like calving grounds. That's fine under BC law. So but then, then there's the Federal Species at Risk Act. So it's kind of looking at like the different ways we can sort of pull levers to protect wildlife that need it. And then we also do a lot of like on the ground work and field work investigations, and looking at what industry is doing in the forests and bringing attention to it. Like hopefully we get there before it happens and we're able to stop it. Sometimes we're successful. Sometimes we're not. Does that?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and when I guess it wasn't the last time I saw you, but like I saw you back in December at COP15, which is a pretty big thing. And you and I had talked before that. We did a couple quirky, fun, nerdy about nature selfie videos about what the Wilderness Committee was working on. I guess going into COP, what were your ambitions? What were you hoping to kind of like impact?
Oh my gosh. Oof. It was, I think like, I don't think I had any, I never thought like me going to COP is going to like fix the framework. I'm going to change the framework. No, so I kind of knew like, I'm just there to observe and do what I can to help. And sort of like, I think my main thing that I wanted to do is call out the bullshit. We were just coming off of COP27 when we heard that there was a lot of like fossil fuel influence at the conference.
And just to clarify, COP27 was the climate one, COP15 was the biodiversity.
Yeah, so COP15 is sort of, the biodiversity conference. the last one we had was the Aichi targets, which they set in 2010 for targets that were supposed to be met in 2020. And so in 2020, they were going to do a new, like, reset the targets, kind of come up with a new framework for the next decade. But then COVID happened, so they had to delay it. So it happened this year instead. So that's what COP15 is, but it's all related to biodiversity and how to protect biodiversity. Whereas COP27 is climate change and like focusing on climate. I mean, they're directly linked, but yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to biodiversity, I know there was a lot of issues that were coming up before then, like issues regarding SARA, or the Species at Risk Act here in Canada, issues regarding like how like national parks are created and how protection measures go into effect. Do you want to kind of give an overview of how those systems kind of operate currently, both in BC and on a federal level?
Yeah. So one of the things that, like, as we were going into COP, and, you know, the federal government's making all these promises, and governments around the world are getting ready to come and commit to these targets. It's like, if you don't have the legal framework to implement these changes, it's not going to happen. Like, the colonial laws that we have in Canada are just that. Like, they're colonial, but they also assign like life-giving forests to like corporate entities. So if you can't address sort of our legal structure and like who gets to make decisions, why decisions are made, we're not going to be able to address or to actually achieve the targets, if that makes sense. Like, yeah. And then so that was one of the issues with SARA, is just like this law is completely lacking. And we're not going to meet targets for extinction when we have this Federal Species at Risk Act that only automatically applies to federal land. You know, like in BC, federal, like non-federal land is 94% of the land base. So if we're trying to halt extinction in Canada, BC has the most species at risk out of every other province and territory in Canada. But the only law that we have to stop extinction only automatically applies to 6% of the land here in BC. On the rest of the 94% of the land base here, there's no legal tool to save an endangered species habitat from getting cut down. So that's kind of like what I was trying to address. Like, we can't, I mean, I feel like people are just over COP because they go there, governments make all these promises, and like nothing actually fundamentally changes. And I think the world, so many people are aware that we need like a systemic change. We need to value things differently. And you're not going to get that from targets that government show up without any law, like without any actual reform. They're just going to say they're going to do these things and then they won't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of standard politics at that point.
Yeah.
So you're saying BC has the highest number of species at risk within Canada, which is on 94% of the land in BC, but there's no law within BC to protect those species?
Yeah, exactly.
Because the federal law only applies to federal lands.
Yeah, it only automatically applies. So there's like this, I guess first, so BC doesn't have a species at risk law.
Right.
So on 94% of the land here in BC, that is non-federal, if a species at risk is living there, it doesn't have automatic protection from being harmed or having its habitat destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Which is what we're seeing with like critically endangered mountain caribou and northern spotted owl.
Yeah, exactly. And so like let's say forestry company who's out there surveying for where they want to put their cut blocks, there's no requirement for them to even do a species at risk survey. If they do see a species at risk, or if they happen to do a species at risk survey, they don't have to report what they found to the government. And then even if they did, the government has no legal
tool to stop them from doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's like so ass backwards. Like, how did it even get that way?
I know. I'm glad you think that. I feel like every time I talk about this, people are bored. But
because like, what's the point of having a law if there's no way to like enforce it or enact, or if it, like, is it all just like smoke and mirrors and like pretty language that like does nothing?
It's really tough because like the way, like when you read the Federal Species at Risk Act, which I'm sure most people have.
Totally. Yeah. I've got it memorized actually.
Good. Yeah. Like the 94 pages. But when you read, I actually have read most of it, but when you read it, you're like, this sounds great. But it's the nuances and sort of like these legal like loopholes and just vague language of the law have made it be completely useless when it comes to actually applying the law. So like I said, the province has an obligation. So the province actually So they have an obligation to protect species at risk on non-federal land. However, the federal government is the body that's required to make sure that the province is protecting critical habitat on non-federal land. When they fail to protect critical habitat on non-federal land, the feds are supposed to step in and issue a safety net order or an emergency order. The safety net order has never been used in the history of the law, and the emergency order has only been used twice. So it's like...
Not in BC, though.
Not in BC. Never in BC. So it's like the federal government does have a legal obligation to make sure that the province is protecting critical habitat, but they don't do that. And then so the province knows that they're not going to do that, so they just carry on with business as usual.
Like, but within that, don't they have to be doing some sort of like biodiversity monitoring or something, like before they start a project, as they start a project, and afterwards? I mean, I know that that's how it works around waterways with like certain fish habitat.
It can be, I mean, it depends what industry we're talking about. If it's logging, like it can be built into their forest stewardship plans, like their wildlife, the values that they want to keep. But in terms of like monitoring and reporting, it's pretty dismal. And even when like an industry is known to be actively destroying species at risk habitat, like it's not enough to stop it. I mean, we see that a lot with spotted owl habitat. We saw that with like speckled belly lichen. Like the trees that like this endangered species was literally growing on were allowed to be cut down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we really need a law in BC that can protect species at risk and their habitat, and sort of just like, I would love to see a law made in a way that's like, I mean, it's a colonial law right now. If we're going to create a law, it will be a colonial law, but in a way that could be from a rights-based approach. And in a way that sort of like adds a filter for companies to just propose better projects. Like it would be amazing if, it's kind of how the U.S. Endangered Species law works pre-Trump. It was the board that approved permits within critical habitat for species at risk would rarely ever give a permit out. So companies just ended up being like, okay, well, we might as well just stay out of the critical habitat because we're not going to get it approved. So there was like this built-in level of like, the onus is on the company to just like do better to begin with.
Right. And so when you're saying like companies operating on non-federal land in BC have an obligation to protect habitat, it's like obligation, but like that's prioritized because it's like obligation while also meeting economic demands first and foremost.
Oh yeah, every time. Yeah. Like when we and it's not even the companies that have the obligation. It's the province that has the obligation to the companies.
So when you talk about like a company having a management plan that may or may not consider critical habitat,
yeah,
that's entirely up to them. It's like that's like their branding, like, oh, well, we are going to operate in a way that protects habitat versus another company that's...
Yeah.
So it's completely up to the company. There's not like an overarching like mandate from BC being like, you can't.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is crazy talk.
I know. I know. This is why we've seen like the extinction of 6 herds of southern mountain caribou, right? Is just like these these laws that we have just don't even consider species at risk. And then you have the unduly clause.
Right.
That's another part of it. But so even if you had
forest practices.
Yeah. So even if you had, some habitat values, like let's say it was like an ungulate winter range we wanted to establish within a harvesting land base that can only impact up to, I think it's 4% for wildlife values. Yeah. 5% total. So
I think it's less than that. I think it's 3% for land and water, like visual aspects and stuff, and hydrology is like one they've included in that. But I think it's only 2% for biodiversity.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that. That's just. But yeah, it's 5% basically.
Hey, I just wanted to pop in here and fact check this real quick. So the retention caps are actually 4% for visual characteristics, hydrology, and ecology, which are things like green veils that hide clear cuts from roadways and passerbys and riparian protection zones, and only 2% for biodiversity. That means that if you, a license holder to log a section of land, want to preserve part of it for biodiversity features alone, you can legally only save up to 2% of that from being logged and only up to 4% for things like protecting salmon-bearing streams, totaling up to a meager 6% of an area that is allowed to not be logged in order to meet values other than timber, while the remaining 94% must be logged as required by law. Crazy, huh? Now, this ridiculous legal framework still exists even with the removal of this unduly clause that we're talking about here, though the removal of this clause does open the potential to changing this framework in the future, which folks are currently working on doing right now.
Yeah. So then you're like, even if you wanted to protect more wildlife values, you actually can't under our laws.
Yeah.
And then it just goes back to like, the only use we're looking at a forest, like the priority is corporate profits.
Right.
That's it.
And recently in BC, they did make a change to that to get rid of the Unduly Act, which is just worth mentioning. Even though that's like, it's still just, it's wording in like a legal document that still doesn't even really take effect for like another 2 years. So it doesn't impact anything directly, but it's basically like allowing people to make management plans that can unduly, quote unquote, affect the economic returns of a timber harvest in order to consider other values such as biodiversity, more than 5%.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good change. Like, I mean, if you talk to people working in like like wildlife and wilderness protection from like the 80s, 90s, like they just hammer on this clause because like without removing unduly, like every like forestry, FERPA, like just kind of trumps every other law. So it's, without removing that, it just puts such a barrier. And so it's nice that that's gone now. But like you said, like it only applies once a company does their new plans, which comes every 5 years. The companies can voluntarily.
Voluntarily.
Yeah, which they won't. But
right. Did you read about the thing happening out in Revelstoke area where there's a logging company whose name I can't remember, but I wish I could because I want to give them credit for it. They're like willingly like, okay, we have like these blocks that we've got set aside. We have the rights to log them. We can log them. We have like another 3 years, I think, to log them. But there's critically endangered old growth like within our blocks that we don't want to log. But then the province, because of like stumpage fees, like, okay, you don't have to log that, but you still owe us the stumpage fees as if you had logged that. So it's actually costing this company who's genuinely trying to do good and not log old growth, it's costing them more money to protect it.
Yeah.
Because the government's it's just like
because the government's laws are so backwards.
Right.
Yeah. They're like
they just favor industry over every other degree. Like,
yeah, exactly.
So the company whose name I couldn't recall here in this conversation was Downey Timber, based in Revelstoke, BC, and I just wanted to give them a kudos for at least trying to make changes to their methodology here in order to preserve old growth forests. And this whole situation is just a great example of how incredibly short-sighted, broken, and myopic the policy and laws of BC still are when it comes to forestry. Here, we have a small family-run timber mill that's trying to do the right thing and evolve their practices to be more ecologically sound, to be in line with the values of their community, and defer this old growth forest to the local First Nations. And yet the BC government is coming in and requiring them to pay for not logging that old growth. I mean, that's ridiculous. News articles about this have broken out calling for some sort of leniency here. But as of right now, recording this podcast, nothing has really happened, although the Ministry of Forest has expressed that they, quote, appreciate the challenge of this situation. So that's something.
Yeah, we just need a total transformation of all of our laws.
Yeah. Easy. Has there been any movement on the BC Species at Risk Act law or anything like that?
Yeah, there has been actually. So in 2017, Horgan announced, like the BC NDP like campaigned and got in on promising this like species at risk law, and then
they promised a lot.
They did promise. Yeah, long list. Sightsee. Yeah. Oh shoot.
Old growth, dang. You guys are gonna make that happen. Yeah. Thanks for your votes, kind people.
I know, right? So they hosted these public consultations. Like, industry went. They were engaging with First Nation leaders on this law. I showed up to the consultation, the industry day. They had like everyone in the room, and we were like well on our way to developing a law, and I guess we were 2 weeks away. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Spaucus.
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
Bald eagle. Haliaetus leucocephalus, for those that didn't see it. There was a pretty big juvenile one that flew over just a moment ago.
Sweet.
Sorry, not to derail you.
I derailed myself.
Yeah. But this is back in 2017, you're saying?
Yeah. So we did a lot of work. Like, everyone did a lot of work. Even people within the Ministry of Environment did a ton of work. This law was, so they say, 2 weeks away from being released for public consultation. So they like had it done. And then John Horgan, just like at this press conference in northern BC, was just like, yeah, there's no law coming in the foreseeable future, and just kind of like pulled it out from everyone, and the work just got shut down. So since then, we've been like advocating that it gets picked back up.
Is there, like, I want to ask why.
Okay, so it's all like...
Did he have a reason?
At that time is when the Caribou Partnership Agreement was happening. I'm not sure if you knew about that.
Not at the time, but I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, so it's basically an agreement between West Moberly Saulteaux First Nations and the federal government in BC to protect caribou habitat, and it's an amazing agreement. One of the biggest, I'd say the biggest agreement since like the Great Bear Rainforest. It's huge. But there was a lot of industry pushback from that, and fear mongering and like racism that was sparked in the North was so bad, and the government didn't do anything to address it. And so I think the government just got really like nervous, and I think he just like said it on a whim and then just like backtracked and like, yeah. I think it was ultimately they were scared of having the partnership agreement happen at the same time as announcing this, the Species at Risk Act.
Because of the backlash, potentially, with it from industry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was just like a hypersensitive time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting how the conversations have shifted in BC to, like, because of the sudden fascination, it seems, with politics to go towards like these UNDRIP measures, like bringing in the nations, which is like so important and impactful, but I feel like because of that, they're like almost stopping any sort of like level of restriction that could happen from like the colonial governments. And I believe that there should be like Indigenous management on these lands, and like they should be working in partnership. But like, and I understand that shift is happening, but I feel like it's almost happening to a point when it's like it's doing the bigger system like a disservice, because it's like we should be able to protect before we like manage, or before like as we transition. Like the idea of like not protecting it and then transitioning, so that by the time the transition occurs, everything's already gone, is like that just seems, again, ass backwards. Like, yeah, and they really, like, the BC government picks and chooses when they're gonna like listen to First Nation leadership. Like, there's been a bunch of nations that are like, hey, like, we want to do deferrals, but we like want to change it this way, or we want to talk about the maps and like let's shift it a bit, or are like, hey, we have this like IPCA proposal that we've had for years, and you're not talking. We can't even get a meeting with you, and then. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say there. And I mean, I've had conversations with folks from like Saulteaux First Nation who are saying like now it's kind of become this thing where like the BC government will sort of like blame Indigenous leadership on their changes, so that like they're the ones that get the backlash. Exactly, they're just
which
scapegoating
is so messed up.
Yeah.
Like, there was like a hunting reform they did, which was like a decent like policy the BC government put in to just help protect moose populations, but they didn't listen to Saulteaux First Nations, and they were like, we want to protect local hunting rights here, but BC ended up allowing like international hunting to still come in, and they were like, no, that's not what we wanted,
because there's industry in that,
because there's money, there's industry. And then when they announced the plan, they were like, this was done in like partnership with Saulteaux First Nation, and they're like, and then so they got all the backlash from like the locals in the area. So it's just like, yeah.
And yeah, like on the picking and choosing subject, it's funny to hear that, and then at the same time, like up in Wet'suwet'en, and they're like, you're like, there are salmon spawning in this creek. You're digging under it for this pipeline. We've told you we don't want the pipeline. And they're just like, we're not listening to you because it's inconvenient to us for our agenda at the time. But
it really, I mean, it's just, it really like, once you hear these stories, it kind of just makes, I'm like, is anything you say about reconciliation actually like legitimate? Like, do you actually mean any of it? Or is it all just for show? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I guess, so moving out of COP, like what happened at COP? Like, was there any good takeaways? Like,
actually,
what were some of the things that we achieved? You were there like 3 weeks.
For a few years.
Yeah, you've aged.
I have. Oh my God.
Like,
Cough was intense.
it's like Interstellar. You come out like 20 years
That's me.
later. Like, oh my God.
I'm just trapped there.
Yeah.
People were like, when are you going home? I'm like, February.
Yeah.
Just wandering the streets being like, hello?
Yeah.
No, I was there for a long time. It was intense. And I just like, yeah, it was a lot. There was a lot of good things that happened. There was a lot of, yeah, I mean, yeah, what do you want to know? You want to know the good, the bad,
All of it.
Okay.
Let's hear your breakdown.
Yeah. I mean, it was weird. It was like, it was going to like a funeral, a high school reunion, like a wedding. It was like a mix because like all of your friends are there and you're meeting so many amazing people from like across the world that are just like so in this fight and like directly like lives on the line from this fight. Like Papua New Guinea folks that are just like, yeah, like we got to fix this. And you know, you have people from like the Amazon, like people from the Amazon there. And it was, so there was like, I feel like 2 parts to COP. Like you could have done it 2 ways. There's like the negotiation space, which is like very high level policy, like wonky. You can go sit in and listen to negotiators from around the world discuss for days about a bracket around the word the. Like you can do that. Or you can go kind of like immerse yourself into that, like the sort of grassroots activist-y world that was happening there. You can go to like the Indigenous Pavilion that was put on that hosted like incredible talks from Indigenous leaders around the world talking about like how to move forward and overcome this biodiversity crisis. So it's like you could kind of, yeah, you could do one or the other. I kind of did a mix of both and I got really burnt out. But yeah, the negotiation space was interesting. It's like, so I don't know if this is interesting to people. I think it's interesting, but
let's hear it.
Okay. Governments will like pick a negotiator and they'll like send that negotiator or whatever to these negotiation rooms. And like the framework is 23 targets and some goals. It started out with 900 brackets. And so like the point of negotiations is to get rid of the brackets. So like everything, and you're working, so there's 196 negotiators advocating on what they want for their country. And you're trying to come to, like, they're trying to come to an agreement on the entire framework. So the goal is
the document.
The document. So the goal is to like remove the bracket. So it's
the brackets are like for example, it'd be like, oh, we want to stop doing this, and then bracket, unless so-and-so objects or something like by 2030 would be in a bracket. Like maybe someone's like, let's not have a target, right? Like, so people are negotiating on just like the nuances of the wording, and like the wording is so important. Like there's certain words that if you like slide in there can totally derail, like nature positive. Right? So like, what a great slogan.
Yeah. Everything's good if it's nature positive.
Right.
Yeah. Forest plantations are nature positive. Yeah. I can talk a little bit about that after, but yeah. So anyways, they got from 900 brackets to 1400 down to 0. And then once it was down to 0 is when the framework was finalized, and then they all voted on it. And some of the targets were really good. So, the biggest win is Target 22 mentions the full protection of environmental human rights defenders, which no one really focuses on. But to me, that's like, if we can make governments accountable to this target, that could mean like the removal of like police force to like protect industrial projects. So like in Wet'suwet'en and like Fairy Creek in the Amazon, like if you're saying all of a sudden like Indigenous folks and like folks fighting to protect like land from industrial projects are actually protected under this target now, then we can stop the use of like police and like the violent removal of people from the land. Mm-hmm. So,
but I mean, that's just like an international agreement, like, you know, wink, wink, nudge versus like actual laws and policy in place.
Yeah, totally. And that's, I mean, this is all just that. Like the whole framework is essentially could be nothing unless it's implemented in law or countries are held accountable to them. But I think there is value in like having the framework, because it gives us something we can like sort of leverage and call the government, like call them out on. And especially like Target 22, if we were to just ask the federal government, well, do you support Target 22? Yes or no? If they say yes, it's like, okay, now we know that like what you're doing is against this global agreement that you've committed to and you said you're going to do this. And then if they say no, then they're then
they're breaking the agreement they committed to.
Yeah. So it's just like it just helps for, I mean, accountability and just like having something to grab onto.
Has there been any movement in that direction since then? I guess that was only 2 months ago, but
yeah. Well, so at COP,
almost 3 months ago now.
Yeah. So when I was at COP, we actually had a presentation, and Minister Gilbo showed up during it and announced that he would be implementing the targets into law via a Accountability Act. Yeah. So we're kind of like figuring out what that's going to look like right now.
And that hasn't been yet proposed or anything. I haven't heard of an Accountability Act.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he just kind of like said it.
Yeah.
But they want to move quick on it. So basically an action plan comes first. This is something all countries have to do, is go home and like make an action plan to implement the targets. And then the next step is, Gilbo was like, we're going to make them accountable in law. So like, we're going to see what that is. And we're kind of working with a group of organizations across Canada to like get the targets actually in law. But then that also begs the question of like, okay, that's federal law. What about the provinces and territories?
Right.
Yeah.
Which gets back to the same Sarah issue.
Yes, exactly.
Where it's like if the federal law explicitly states that it only takes effect on federal land, then all of a sudden all of the non-federal land, it's out of their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of one of the things that I always bring up. I'm like, you need to be working with provinces and territories to implement the targets.
Interesting.
Yeah. One of the targets, like you asked about some of the good things that happened, and I forgot to mention this, but 30 by 30 is one that was good. But I think like, again, without like the law reform and stuff, it's just like kind of sectioning off a space of wilderness or, like marine area that sort of like operates under the assumption that like humans on the landscape is fundamentally harmful. Like we need to like protect and like close off 30% of the land so it can like just be there for it, like itself. And I think I just wanted to bring this up because this is what a lot of the Indigenous folks were also saying at the forum. Like, we need to just like what happens to the rest of the 70% of the land and water that's not protected? Will industry just hit it harder? Yeah. Exactly. But it's like, it just, it assumes that like humans can't have a relationship with the land that is positive. And that's like not true. Like the industrial economy that we're in now is like relatively new. Like I always point to caribou for this example. Like caribou have been living with like Indigenous peoples across this land for like hundreds of thousands of years, like co-evolving together and like relying on each other for everything, like food, for like tools. Like this relationship is like so deep, and like different First Nations like burn the land to like produce forage for the caribou and then hunt them in a way that's sustainable. So like it just shows that like you can live on the landscape in a way that is mutually beneficial and positive. And I think we just like also need to remember that like there's just this idea that human beings in their nature are harmful, and I think we really need to break that down, because if we believe that, like how are we going to solve these issues? So yeah, I think 30 by 30 is like one of those examples of like, it's just like, it's not trying to like recreate our value system and like, I don't know.
Well, it's stepping away from the capitalism.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just finding different ways to operate on the land. And like even colonization, obviously, and rightfully so, has such a bad rap, but like people have also been migrating around the world since the beginning of time to get out of different situations and to find better opportunities to live. So it's just like a model that like lets go of the where we came from and like embraces where we are, and like learning from the people who have these connections to the land and like creating like new societies, like new ways of thinking and being in relation to one another and the world that we all share.
Totally. Yeah. I like that.
What were some of the shortcomings out of COP?
Yeah, a lot. So when I mentioned this at the beginning, but one of the things I wanted to do is find like industry influence at COP. They were much more sort of cagey about it and less transparent. They wouldn't give me the list of companies showing up. But I found CropLife was going. Do you know who CropLife is?
Never heard of them.
Oof. You're gonna hate this. They're an international like body that basically advocates on behalf of Monsanto, Bayer, and ChemChina, like the world's most powerful pesticide producing companies in the world. And they had a space at COP, like a huge room, like 300 like capacity seating, whereas like the Muskrat Collective, which is like a group of Indigenous youth that are doing amazing work, were given like a room with like 20 seats to speak in. So it's just like the contrast there. But we called them out, so we held like a demonstration outside of their event dressed as butterflies and bees.
Oh, I think I saw some of this on Instagram.
Yeah. So I made those costumes at 3 a.m.
Nice.
I was like, I'm an artist. I got this. And I got this like glyphosate suit. So we had like a sprayer. So he was like the glyphosate applicator. So he's like spraying it. We had like the sound system of like the sound of the spray. And then like we like managed to gather like 15 people to do this. And we ended up pulling it off pretty good. The sprayer guy, Mark, you know him, he managed to spray like one of the head guys of CropLife International.
Were they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good on him.
I know. I dragged him to it.
Just to clarify which Mark? Like, yeah.
I dragged him to it, and the best part is like I was initially going to be the sprayer, so I got this like size small like painter suit, and then I gave it to Mark, and then like so the whole time he just like has this wedgie, and it's like he's like spraying, and it's on all the newspapers. It's funny.
That's great.
Yeah. So that was good. It was like kind of this fun little like, I don't know, I like art. I like using art as a way to bring attention to issues, and we just totally bombarded their meeting. It was such a lame meeting. Like it was just CropLife people. I'm like, who are you even doing this for? Like.
And yeah, who'd you say? Well, Monsanto is now Bayer.
Yeah.
Bayer and ChemChina.
Yeah.
That's kind of like a nice name because at least they're getting right to the point of what they do. It's like,
I know.
You know it's China and you know it's chemicals. And it's like, okay. Like,
right?
Easy.
I know.
Yeah.
Whereas like Bayer, took over Monsanto just because Monsanto is like associated with like the worst things we've ever, Agent Orange, PCBs, DDT. Yeah. Glyphosate.
Which we can get into later.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to say CropLife at the event, they were worried about Target 7. So Target 7 was the reduction in pesticide use, which would have been amazing.
But
yeah, it didn't make it. It got changed to reduction in the risks of pesticides. So like we're going to rely on more like labeling. Like if we can label products better. Yeah. So it got changed to reduce the risks of pesticides. Yeah.
That's so ambiguous.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of the targets sort of changed to. It's just like not actual numerical targets. Like another target was like, we want to reduce extinction, but not by how much or by when. Right. So like
it's just reduce extinction. Broad statement.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so interesting to me. Like that was kind of like one of the takeaways that I saw from it. And like I was there just like a fraction, like a sliver of the time compared to you.
You were there for like 5 minutes.
I was there for more than 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
It was a couple days.
Yeah. It felt short.
It was.
Yeah.
I mean, the grand scheme of things, like, I think it was like right in the middle of your stint as well. I was there at the beginning of the second week.
Yeah.
But yeah, like amazing event. So many cool people there. Like so inspiring to see all of like the activist stuff, the Indigenous village on the water there, like all these amazing speakers and like people with like their heart and soul and like their body like in it, you know, like just embodying this like being there. Like, you know, a lot of people like were self-funded, like came out because they wanted to like be able to voice themselves or express their voices. But, you know, and then it's just like glass wall. and you just can observe the people who are making these decisions on behalf of everybody else, but not engaging with anybody else. They're just acting on behalf of their countries. And it was just this like weird thing where it was like, I don't know. It felt so, I don't know. I don't even know the words to describe it. Just big, doom, gloomy. Like it felt like Star Wars Empire Strikes Back kind of vibe where it's like, yeah, like everybody on the streets and like outside in all these tiny halls like has such great thoughts and ideas and feelings and like ways to implement this change, but then like the people actually making the change are totally isolated from that, and the only people who are able to input that change are the big paying organizations or people like CropLife who are coming in with enough funding and support for the event as a whole, where they get like a big 200 seat room versus a small little nonprofit coming in with 20 seats. Like it's so like all these conversations are still swayed by the same kind of corporate entities that dictate our life and laws, and like every individual company or every individual country, are still like they're actively playing roles in like this international delegation of how we decide to live as a species on this planet. Like it's just like, at what point, like, is there an escape from it? Like, how do you get away from that influence?
Yeah, I know. I hear you. And I think like, I didn't even realize there was like until like about halfway through, I didn't even realize there was like a full business side of this all.
What do you mean?
Like I was sitting in like the nature pavilion, and like you said, like you're just around so many people with so many amazing ideas, and we're going to, you know, the events that are like holding like space for actual solutions to be thought of, and you're feeling the grief, you're feeling the loss, but you're feeling solidarity. And I think sharing grief also is like really healing, and then you can like, you know, find the power to like keep going forward with that. But so I'm in this like deep state of just like so much overwhelming feelings of like, this is like, we're all here fighting for something so much bigger than us. And then these like two business guys like sit down behind me, and they just start having a conversation about like how this can be great for their business. And it just like, I was like, wait, what? Like, I was like, there's like some other like motive for being here. I'm so confused. Yeah. And I think that's just like naive of me, but I was just feeling a type of way on that day. And it just like, yeah, I mean, like you just have the business like entities that were also just like there. And I was like, oh, I totally forgot that was the thing. And yeah, I mean, I felt the same. There's like so many good solutions and so many people just, like bringing so much truth to these topics that just like, then there's no way to get
through. Yeah. And that's kind of it. It's like all of these like you'd think that like you would want to design a world where you're listening to the people who actually care and are invested in this and like you know, emotionally, physically impacted by these decisions. But no, like money trumps all.
I know.
That's kind of it. And that's like really disappointing thing to say. When you were saying that there was a business side of it, my initial thought was like, what, like the coffee stands in there? Because they made a mint in there. It was like $5 a coffee, and like in the lines like through the door, you're like it's not even good coffee.
That's so fun.
They're just raking it in. Yeah. I got kind of pitched this like water product. I don't even know what the guy was selling, but it was just like, you know, like when you're like getting fronted by like a used car salesman, and he's just like, oh, we've got this product solution. Oh, you are river restoration? Let me tell you about this water thing. And we're just like, oh God. And it was like 10 minutes and we're just like, oh, we gotta go. And then like just fully like found a way to snuck out of this conversation, but it was just so slimy and greasy. And it was like, you're not like, what you're suggesting isn't like a real solution for big. It's like you're just like seeing this little niche where you can like make a lot of money right now if you get some, you know, angel investors and sway people with the right greenwashed marketing, and you can make some real money here. And it's like, oh my God, just get out of here. How'd you get here?
How'd you get in?
Yeah.
Like who let you in? And that's just it. Is like people like are still seeing this not as like the crisis it is. Like this is like gonna directly affect every single living thing on this planet. They're like, hey, this is a great business opportunity. And I'm just like,
And like that is to say that like within that business opportunity, I think there are and can be some opportunity for people to really create change within like the private sector and like use business as a force for good. Unfortunately, I just don't think you see it all too often. And when it is, it's usually like shouted over and by like the people who don't have like good intentions but have deeper pockets, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's not to say that like businesses can't ever operate in a way that is better. But yeah, I just didn't think that they should have like a space at like the negotiating part of it. And like you said, also, I think in our like capitalist, late stage capitalist economy, the companies that actually are trying to do better won't like make it because they can't compete in this capitalist marketplace when they're choosing to have better practices. So yeah. It's like a race to the bottom.
Right. Yeah, it is really interesting. Like, I just think about it a lot with like forestry industry reform and like even going through and managing second growth forests. Like, so the people who are watching this can't see, but we're looking at this like second growth forest that, to my knowledge, was all reseeded naturally, which is, I don't know, is what it is. I think it was logged like maybe 30, 40 years ago. But like it's tight. There's like not a lot of understory. There's not a lot of anything happening. It's like really tight canopy. And like, this is like what a majority of forests all around BC look like, regardless of this like specific biogeoclimatic zone. Like all these forests, whether they're replanted or reseeded naturally, kind of have this like really tight early successional stage that creates all sorts of different problems with hydrology and with fire, like and lack of diversity for all sorts of wildlife. But the cost to go in and like do the restoration efforts it would take in order to help this forest like succeed to the next level, like come in thin, replant some different like species of shrubs and huckleberries in the understory to kind of create that diversity, and leaving like standing dead snags and all these old growth characteristics. Like, that's a ton of money that the logging companies didn't have to account for, didn't have to pay for at the time because they didn't know about that, quote unquote. They didn't know. They didn't care about it. And then, so now it's like, how do you make a business that does this? Like, what are you selling? Like, what are you buying? Like, how do you make money?
Yeah.
And like the amount of money it requires, like across the province, that's like, 60 million hectares? It's like, it's huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, it's a really daunting issue because then it's like everybody's trying to talk about like how to reform logging and industry and how to like, fireproof our ecosystems and how to retain water and soil function and everything, like all these different things and biodiversity. Like, how are we going to retain biodiversity? But like that still requires like a very active, engaged part of the human species with these ecosystems, because we've always been active parts of these ecosystems. I feel like people are just like, I don't know, if there's no way to make money at it, then they're just like bowing out. Yeah. And like, we need to get over that hurdle of like capitalism and do it because it's the right thing to do, and not because you're going to be able to, I don't know, buy a Escalade with spinner rims on it. I don't know.
Right.
As if people still do that. I don't know.
Dude, yeah, the spinner rims. I haven't seen those in so long.
I just aged myself.
Yeah. Yeah, you did.
Early 2000s.
You really
That's
did.
Quote, yeah.
Well, I think like, if we think about like who benefits from the specific system that we're in right now, especially with like logging, like we don't even have a lot of jobs in logging anymore. Like the amount of trees that we've logged has kind of varied, but mostly gone up, right? But the amount of jobs we've had in logging industry has only gone down. So it's like, it's not really working for jobs either, but we're logging more trees. So it's also not working for biodiversity. Who is it working for? It's literally working for the shareholders and the CEOs. So it's like they're taking this value, this like monetary value from a forest, and just like funneling it to a select few people. Where I think that like if we really tried to focus on like equity, building in equity into our forest policies, where it's like, if you are going to log in a place, like the profits from that logging goes back to the community as much as it can to fund like a restorative economy. And just, yeah, I mean, I think so many solutions come from just like more locally owned companies making decisions. Like a CEO from Florida shouldn't be making a decision about a forest he's never going to step foot in over here. And I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all the shareholder thing. It's extraction. They're just extracting the monetary value from these resources, quote unquote, these areas, without having to have any accountability to them in the future. Which, speaking of, is a great transition to the second topic you wanted to talk about, which is glyphosate.
Yeah.
Because glyphosate is a big thing sprayed all over by, the forest industry, particularly here in BC. And it's just funny, like back to the jobs thing. Like, I've read a thing from the Truck Loggers Association talking about how it's a great new breach of technology. They're going to replace tree planters with drones. And I'm like, like, tree planters are already the lowest paid people in the industry, and you're going to replace them with drones?
Please, no.
And then to the same point, you have like, instead of having people go through manually with brush saws and stuff, like trimming back trees, you're spraying glyphosate over the whole province.
Yeah. Like, I think when a company proposes a plan, it should be like prioritized based on how many jobs it can create. Like, that automation of like tree planters like should just be fundamentally just like no, like, just because why would we do that? Like, I feel like the whole reason, I mean, a large reason lately that we like extract so much is in the name of jobs. So we just need to resist that type of stuff and just be like, that doesn't work for our communities, actually. Yeah, glyphosate.
Yeah, well, and even within that, though, I just want to make an asterisk that like all of these technological solutions are made in the name of jobs. It's just like, what kind of jobs do you want to create? It's like if they're flown by drones, that's like remote pilots or people. It's like it's a very tech jobs thing. And it's like, we'll create 50 jobs with this new thing. But what they're not telling you is about all the other people that are going to be laid off.
Right, totally.
So it's like, that's cool. And then pushing that through,
the narrative, yeah.
So it's all like, again, in the nuance of like the broader system. But yeah, glyphosate's pretty fucked.
Yeah.
I was going to try to censor myself and use a better word, but there is some words that just encompass everything.
Oh no, it's so bad. I was writing a paper on it, and I actually just like threw myself into like such a sadness learning like the roots of glyphosate, how it got approved. It's just like scandal after scandal, like manufacturing consent for this product that is so toxic. It kills 3 kingdoms of life. So bacteria, plants, and fungi. So when you kill off 3 out of the 5 kingdoms of life in an ecosystem, like that's gonna have impacts, big ones. And so, yeah, it's basically used by logging companies. So after they cut in a forest, they're not done. Companies want to come back and replant in order to log again in the future. And in BC, it's actually like legally required that they do this. It's called a free to grow policy, where they want to make sure that like the cash conifer species, so like the harvestable species that is most profitable to logging companies, regrow. So they'll kill off all the other like native shrubs, so that that the trees are free to grow. So they'll literally like spray glyphosate from like helicopters. There's like been folks out in the forest like videoing and like seeing this like chemical being sprayed over the landscape.
Just like they did DDT in the 50s.
Yeah. So Monsanto created DDT in the or using it in the 50s. They used it a lot on Namgis territory on Vancouver Island. Rachel Carson actually like cited the impacts of it in her book. And then
Silent Spring, great book for those who haven't read it.
Yeah, get to it. And then so now Monsanto is back in Bayer's clothing with glyphosate on hand, and they're spraying all over Vancouver Island. Plants too. So
and all over the rest of BC, especially up in northern BC, it happens all the time.
Yeah, totally. All over Canada, except for Quebec, who banned it.
All over the world, really.
Yeah.
And Washington and Oregon, it's really bad down there. I read a thing that sorry for the Oregonites who are hearing this, but I read a thing a while ago that apparently Short Sands Beach in Oregon, which is like a famous surf spot, because of all the logging that happens in the surrounding hillsides and all the glyphosate that's sprayed, that's actually like one of the most toxic beaches to surf in Oregon, maybe even like the whole kind of Pacific Northwest. But it's like on an average sunny, August day, there will be cars lined up all up the highway, and you've got to walk in. It's so popular, and nobody knows that it's just all the glyphosate draining out through that little river mouth there.
And that and it just, it happens. It's just not transparent. And then these companies, I think the crux of it for me is that we're like the reason it's used in forestry is literally just for corporate profits. Like that, and like the trade-off of like the poisoning of like people and animals and plants, and how it just, I mean, it like destroys the biodiversity in an area. It's just
and corporate profits on such a short time scale
Yeah.
is the thing, because it's like what they're really doing is like taking these natural patterns of succession where you would get like alders and a bunch of deciduous trees coming in and like revitalizing the soil after a disturbance, and they're just getting rid of those so they can grow conifers faster. But conifers take a ton of nitrogen from the soil that they don't actually put back into the soil. What does put that back in is all the lichen that like lichen fungi that
the fungi sharing the nitrogen
that the glyphosate kills.
That the glyphosate kills.
And the leaves from alders, those first generational successors that put nitrogen back into the soil. So it's just like you're running that to the bottom too, where it's like you're not only depleting the nutrients within these forest ecosystems within the soils, just to try to like get these conifers planted sooner, growing sooner, so that you can harvest them sooner. It's basically.
Yeah, like you said, it's like on the shortest time scale. Like they will go back to a block that's been sprayed and see like, okay, in 5 years there's like a little like more growth, but like over the long term what we're finding is like they don't grow back like healthy, and then there's a lot of die off. So a lot of the blocks that are supposed to meet free to grow requirements in BC aren't meeting it, because we're learning that actually ecosystems need like fungi, they need like alders fixing nitrogen, they need like the native plant biodiversity in the beginning to set the stage to become like that healthy forest in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it just boggles my mind that you can cut a 3,000-year-old forest down and expect to grow the same quality of wood and trees and everything in 70 years. If you give it 70 years, it boggles my mind.
I think it just also boggles my mind that like like the impact of that company is just like forever now on the land. Like they take the biggest trees, and then they come back for more, and their like noxious imprint on the land is just like everlasting, and it's never enough.
It's never enough, yeah. The scariest thing to me about glyphosate,
I want to guess.
The scariest thing, like, yeah, there's obviously like cases where they've like seen things in the way it can alter or have adverse health effects like to people now. But like one of the things that they've been studying like more and more, especially with mice, because mice have shorter lifespans, so you can see this impact, is that glyphosate has relatively little impact on the generation that it's sprayed on, the F0 generation, but it compounds as you go down. So like the F1, F2, F3 generation they found has like, so you're basically your grandchildren has like the highest levels of like risks for all sorts of like liver, kidney diseases, cancers, like all sorts of different things because of glyphosate that was used on their grandparents. And like we obviously don't have those studies yet with humans, because humans live like 60, 70 years on average, and it just kind of started like one generation ago. So we're still like we would be the F1 generation. Whoa. Which is nuts to think about. Like the impact it's going to have, like even if we stop using it tomorrow, the impact it's going to have on everybody, everything. Like it's not just the forest, like it's sprayed on, like if you go to a grocery store and you buy fruit, you buy anything there that's not organic, like, and even some of the organic stuff gets sprayed from time to time to save a crop. Like, so it's literally everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have no idea what it's going to do to our kids. And and because there's that shortcoming in how you make something legal and able to be used within like our policy framework for getting chemicals like okayed to be used, you know, because of that shortcoming there and that lack of studying, it's just like we're just dooming our future generations.
Yeah. I mean, so the EPA, when it got approved in the US, the study that it got approved on turned out to be fraudulent.
Really?
Yeah. The people the scientists that were part of that study actually ended up doing jail time.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is like 50s, 60s? Like...
Yeah. 50s. And this is, so that happened, right? And then the US approved glyphosate for use. Roundup became a thing. And then there's like an international agency that like studies the toxicity of, I'm blanking on the name right now, but they came, IRAC. I know the acronym.
Mm-hmm. How do you spell that?
IARC? IRAC. Yeah. They came up with a report that like finally was like, you know what, we're going to like look into this glyphosate thing. This was in 2015. They were like, okay, yeah, it's a probable carcinogen. Okay. Health Canada later that later that year ended up approving glyphosate for use again without considering that new finding that it's a probable carcinogen and relying on the fraudulent studies that were done by the U.S. EPA in the beginning. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's a really, really, like, this is why I got into this like depression, because I was like the history of glyphosate and how it was approved is just like, yeah, like collusion, like ghost, like Monsanto would like ghost write articles. You got like, yeah, the scientists that like end up going to jail over this study that's still being used to like allow it. And it's just like, our laws just suck. Like you should have to be able to prove something is safe before it can be used. Like it shouldn't be like uncertainty means yes. And like, it's not even like it was uncertainty. A probable carcinogen. You have over 600,000 court cases in the US from people who have developed cancer after spraying glyphosate. Like it's incredibly toxic to like your skin, like if you're a sprayer, but then like it also kills all the bacteria and in your body. So people say glyphosate doesn't impact animals, but like what makes a healthy like gut? Bacteria. Yeah. And so glyphosate that we're eating is impacting our gut, and who knows the impacts that's having on us. So yeah,
all sorts of issues with like I mean gut digestion. Like I know so many people that have gut and health problems like that.
Yeah, my stomach never feels good.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, and even bigger things like I don't know if I haven't read any studies on it or anything. I don't know what it is, but like I feel like, at least in my personal life, I've known or heard about like far more people getting like colon cancer than like was ever a normal thing growing up. And
I just saw like a thing for that in my elevator.
Really?
Yeah, there's like this like news, I don't know, TV thing, but it was saying
like
how like colon cancer is on the rise.
Yeah. Oh, so it is.
Yeah.
There is something.
In Canada and the US.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And like you would think that might be associated with like the food we're eating, especially like, again, like a generation down the line.
Yeah. It's just, and so, yeah. I'm gearing up for a campaign to stop some of its spraying though. So I got my hands on some glyphosate maps. So this is one of the things about the law. There's like this pest management plan. It's a 5-year plan that forestry companies have to create that basically gives a broad area of the area, like of where they're gonna spray. So it's like, I mean, for instance, like it's by TFL. So TFL 47 is just like this massive area, and they just like are like, hey, we're gonna spray somewhere in this area for the next 5 years, and then they're given 30 days to like consult like Indigenous nations and the public.
30 days before spraying?
No, 30 days. There's just a 30-day consultation window for a 5-year pest management plan.
Okay, gotcha.
If the company reaches out to a nation and they try 3 times and they don't reply in 3 times, and it doesn't say like who, and then like a community member, like a council, a chief, a hereditary, like it doesn't say who. The law is very, very like vague. It just says you have to try to reach out to like impacted First Nation 3 times. If they don't reply, then that's like consent. Okay, so so if they don't reply, it's fine. And then so then they have 30 days to consult on a 5-year plan. There's no like pathway to no. So there's no pathway to like, don't do that. You can't spray here. Like there's no like, if they say this, then this. It's all just like, try to figure it out. Anyway, so a lot of these pest management plans get approved without the nation even knowing. And then every year from then on, there's a thing called notice of intent to treat. And that is like the specific mapped cut blocks. Like here's where we're spraying, here's where we're spraying. And those maps are not accessible to the public or to nations if they ask for them.
Really?
Like the company doesn't have to provide those maps.
Not even if they ask?
Not even if they ask.
Wow.
Unless they made that like a requirement in the 5-year pest management plan, which a lot of nations like don't know to do. Like they don't know to be like, oh, we have to say this. So getting our hands on maps of where they're going to spray has been really hard, but we managed to get some for TFL 47. So they're going to go in and they're going to spray all over Montegila territory. over 500 cut blocks. Yeah. So we're going to go try to stop that.
When does all that taking place?
They have to give us, so they sent the maps to the government, and then after they send the maps to the government, they have 21 days to begin spraying. So it could start as early as March 17th.
Wild.
Yeah.
That's in like a week.
Yeah. So I got to get going.
10 days.
I got to go. Yeah. I'm trying to get out to the territory before it sprays, and then we can do kind of like a before, like hopefully we can stop the spray. But if not, we want to sort of like look at the traditional like medicine and food plants that are there and see what's on the line. There's also a man who has a trap line that goes right through the cut blocks as well. That's going to be sprayed. There's salmon bearing streams all around. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing too, like the impact of glyphosate on benthic invertebrates and stuff in those streams that juvenile salmon rely on to exist. That's crazy. Like the last podcast episode I did was with this lovely woman, Sandy Ward, from the Lilwat Nation, and we talked about that idea of consent, and like to her, like she says it in that episode. I was just thinking about that, like if you don't get a reply, that's a no. Like that is what the answer is. And it's like even if you keep replying like 3 times and you don't get a reply, for that them to interpret that as consent is just so, again, ass backwards.
I know.
It's like,
I know. And like, yeah, the BC government, they're implementing UNDRIP.
Right.
And in UNDRIP it says like free, prior and informed consent, and free is like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, free is like you're
not under duress. Like,
yeah, and a lot of the nations like don't have do you know how many projects come to the table? Like so many. So free should be, I think, like giving like money, having the government like give money so that a nation can actually take the time and have resources needed to actually assess a project before it happens. Prior means what it means, like way before, and then informed, like you have all the information you need to make the decision. And so, yeah, that is not 3 times you email what happens if the email is just like not being checked?
Yeah, just bouncing. Like, yeah, that's ridiculous. And in what time frame? Because like that's like all these things, like, I mean, even going back to the glyphosate being tested and found that it's not doing harm, quote unquote. Like again, like what are the parameters we're setting around these tests? It's like, oh, like glyphosate after being on your skin, like it's fine a week later. It's like, okay, well, how about a year? How about 10 years? And then again, back to the generational thing. It's like, how do we not take like the full existence of it into account? Like we're so just like, again, those shorter time scales, people are just trying to make money while they're here as quick as they can. But it's just, when like I'd like to think that everybody lives on this planet, and like, especially as you get older, everybody says they do it for the kids, and it's like, I'm trying to create a better world for our kids, I'm trying to give my kids opportunities, put them through college, all this stuff. It's like, at what point do you actually just stop and reflect on the world you're actually leaving your kids, and being like, yeah, that's cool, you got them a car when they turn 16 and can drive, and you're gonna put them through college, but like
there's not gonna be any
they die of colon cancer at 30 because of all the glyphosate you sprayed. Like, what's the point?
I know that's a disconnect, because I feel that too. I worked in Fort Mac for a long time, and with a lot of folks that worked in the oil sands, and like that was like, they're like, I don't want to be doing this, but like I'm doing this because like my family, like I got a family to take care of. And I'm like, I get that. Like I like that's got to be something that is like your priority, but more than that, like they need a safe future, and like we are just creating such an uncertain future. And yeah. And in defense of like those people working like those jobs, like even individual loggers, like I get the fact that it's a job and you need to support your family. Like I think the accountability should fall upon like the higher ups and the legal structure that allows things like this to happen, that degrades the betterment of like society as a whole, because like, yeah, everybody's just kind of working a job and doing what they need to do to survive. Like I get that it's not on their hands. It's like they're just in a system that's like totally fucked and corrupt. Like we need to fix the system at the top. Like the only jobs that could like support a 3 to 5 person family are like usually jobs that are exploiting the environment. Like, and that's an issue. Like, where's the money going? The money's going to like a small fraction of people. Like, we got to fix that. Equity, redistribution of wealth. Yeah,
I know. There's so many things to go on about.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so where can people go to find out about these campaigns and the maps and stuff you got going on?
Yeah, wildernesscommittee.org if you still use a computer, if you're only on your cell phone. Instagram, I guess.
Instagram?
Yeah, I would go to our Instagram. But like...
Which is Wild News.
Wilder News?
Which is like wilderness, but with...
I would have been fired.
The first S turned into a W.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
That's a clever one, yeah.
Yeah.
Wilder News, wildernesscommittee.org.
Yeah. I guess I also just want to say, like, I don't know. I think it's like pretty overwhelming for like listeners to feel empowered that like they can make a change. But I do want to say that, like, I don't know. I definitely feel a change coming. I think the BC government especially is like more vulnerable to like the environmental like movements right now. Like I know that we have a chance to really make change, and we've like done that before, like based on people signing up and like doing our call to actions. We've stopped coal mines, we've stopped logging in caribou habitat, we've got Argonaut Creek protected. Like, I get like the burnout of just like sending an email, but sometimes it works, and
and making a phone call. I find phone calls to be really like not easy, but like easier, because then you can just like, usually it's a person that picks up. If you're leaving a message, that's awkward. I hate doing that. But then you can like usually talk to the person, and like they're usually like, if they're answering an MP's phone, like they're pretty, open to having dialogue, and you can really get messages through there where you're talking to humans and not just sending off an email into the void. Yeah.
And then you can even like, if you develop a relationship with your like MP, they can like bring issues to the house. Like, it can happen. And I get, I don't know. I just wanted to say that I get it can seem very pointless, but collectively, we've all achieved such amazing wins. And like, I mean, we obviously have so much more to do, but yeah. I
think it's important to recognize those and address those, address the wins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on.
This is a tangent, but I was thinking about the glyphosate thing. Because I told you, like, that's the scariest thing to me. I've recently been watching Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, man.
A few years too late. I know.
I can't. It's too much.
It's fucked.
Yeah.
But what's crazy to me, like the premise of it, for those who don't know, if you're living under a rock and this is the first time you've heard of Handmaid's Tale, it's like people in like the near future / now all of a sudden can't have children.
Yeah.
And then you think about like the generational impact of a thing like glyphosate, or maybe even something that we aren't even aware of yet that's like impacting us. It's like that actually, like, it seems like something that could happen. I don't know.
No, it does.
I love sci-fi because sci-fi always takes like these like really like just interesting looks at like the reality we live in, and I think that can be really impactful for sharing a story. So when you like consider that, and you consider like the rise of like some radical conservatism, like in the States especially, and even here in Canada, and you see that show and the way that like women are oppressed, and it's just like, you're like, man, like, I could see it happening.
I know.
It's scary.
It's not far off.
Yeah,
I know.
It's not.
I mean, like, let's hope not. But
that's where it takes people to continue to be engaged to prevent Handmaid's Tale from coming true.
That's it. That's all we're fighting for, is to not have Handmaid's Tale become a thing. Take action if you don't want to live in Handmaid's Tale. No.
Yeah.
So have you seen like the like attack, or like the like public worry about like fungi since like The Last of Us?
Oh yeah, I've heard of this Last of Us show.
Yeah,
I saw one episode. I think it was the 3rd episode, because it's this really
weird place
beautiful.
To start.
My brother showed it to me. Okay. It's this really beautiful love story about like these two gay guys who fall in love at the end, like in the end of the world, and they like grow to old age and die together, and it's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's worth a watch.
I haven't got there. Shit,
yeah,
but
there's not a single fungi zombie in it.
Oh,
yeah,
great. But yeah, I don't know. Let's prevent the Handmaid's Tale together. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for coming out. Thanks for bearing the cold with me.
Freezing.
The trees are in the sun.
That must be nice.
Yeah.
Next time we should go up there. Yeah.
Hey, Hey, Dougie.
You should do a podcast in a tree.
I will put that on my list.
You should do that.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
I'll have to figure out some technical hurdles there.
Marbled mirlet. It could be about
That
marbled
would be
mirlets.
cool.
Yeah.
Or lichen.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So Charlotte totally forgot to mention this during our conversation, but wanted me to let you all know that BC is currently working on biodiversity legislation under the Old Growth Strategic Review, and that Wilderness Committee is working to make sure that legislation ensures protection for species and their habitat, and that biodiversity targets are put into law. So you can learn more about all of this, glyphosate, and find ways to get involved by visiting wildernesscommittee.org or visiting @wildernews on Instagram. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, thanks to everyone who supports Nerdy About Nature on Patreon, Charlotte would like to give this very first podcast donation to Indigenous Climate Action, which is an Indigenous-led organization guided by a diverse group of Indigenous knowledge keepers, water protectors, and land defenders from communities and regions all across the country. They're doing some really great, powerful work that you can learn more about at indigenousclimateaction.com, and I'm stoked to help support that cause through this platform here. It's been pretty wild and absolutely amazing to watch support for Nerdy About Nature grow so much over the past few months. I'm super appreciative to each and every one of you. Y'all are the best. I'm so stoked to finally be at a point when I can give a little bit back, but I would also like to remind all of you that this whole project is currently just a one-man band. I do all the research, shooting, organizing, editing, literally all of it myself, and it gets pretty dang exhausting at times. I would love to get to a point when I can actually afford to hire somebody for some assistance here so that I can continue to grow the project to educate and inspire more of y'all. So if you're enjoying this podcast and all the fun vids I create all over social media, you can help support their production by joining the Patreon family at patreon.com/nerdyboutnature for $1 a month or more. And all of that goes directly back into helping give me the stability to make all this continue to happen. If you're not able to support on Patreon, that's no worries at all. You can help support this project by liking, sharing, commenting on social media, or wherever you're listening to this podcast, and by giving me a good rating so that more and more folks can get involved. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I am trying to evolve this podcast a bit, and making donations for each episode is part of that, but I'm also trying to find ways to involve all of you just a little bit more. You know, I currently have a post on my Patreon page where supporters can ask me questions, and then I'll answer them here on the podcast, and not many of you have used this little perk recently, but I would love to address any of your burning nature questions head on, so jump on there if you've got them. Then I've also been playing with the idea of trying to have something consistent to wrap up each episode, whether that be, me telling you a random fun fact that I recently learned, or sharing a random story with you, maybe a tidbit from my personal life or a game or something. I don't know what you want, but I'm open to any and all ideas. So if you're a Patreon member, I'll have a post there where you can submit ideas or themes or games or whatever you want there, and we can all chat about it on the Patreon Discord group as well. I'm just looking for ways to get you all involved a little bit more and make this whole thing fun, so come at me with whatever ideas you may have. And now, to wrap things up, I'm going to leave you with a recent fun fact that I just learned, not related to anything we've talked about today, okay? So, did you know that of all recorded attacks and fatalities by cougars in North America, 25% of them are on Vancouver Island? See, I live on Vancouver Island, and that is absolutely terrifying to me. Cougars scare the absolute piss out of me, and I had no idea the number of attacks was that high around here. So, yeah, terrifying. And it hasn't made for the most enjoyable nature walks around dusk lately either, so that's fun. Anyways, thanks again, as always, for tuning into this episode. It's great having you here, and I'll see you all again in a couple weeks with another new one. Until then, take it easy.